Hey guys, so we of course had a very exciting weekend of Worlds, but just to focus a little bit back on the TCG a bit, as usual I wanted to do a tier list of the best rogue decks in the current format using data from Dueling Book through YGScope.com, as well as some topping information from the Remote Duel Extravaganza. And so before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as usual, links and discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles, sealed product, as well as Yu-Gi-Oh! Supplies in the description down below. Now this was the tier list for the most recent month using data as well, and so this time it was a little bit more volatile in terms of the tier score calculation, just because the only event that we had post DUNE was that Remote Duel Extravaganza, which was a bit of a smaller event and only, a smaller number of decks at top. So, the score's a little volatile, so that's why you had something like Soul and Marincess being scored very high because they did top in those events, not to discredit them of course. So anyways, for the purpose of this specific video, it's only going to focus on the rogue deck, so nothing in tier 1 or 2 will be included in this video except for Marincess. I decided to slide that down back into Rogue just because I think that's where it truly belongs. Also, Rescue Ace, I think for now I will leave it at tier 2, but I think, in the next month, I think we're going to have that conversation whether it actually belongs in Rogue. So let's just get right on to the Rogue tier list for this month, and we're going to start with Unchained. I understand that I did not actually have this deck in the recent meta tier list, and that's because YGScope, the site that I used to get the data from Dueling Book, it cannot identify Unchained right now. At the same time, there are workarounds to kind of get the data for this deck. So anyways, it's got a lot of new support in the most recent Dune set, so it's definitely kind of coming back after, the last time you kind of saw it play was like maybe around 2019, early days of the pandemic as well. So it's a deck that can do a lot of pops essentially, so which can be pretty good. They kind of float as well, and it can be played with either pure or evil twins because there's a lot of good synergy with that as well in terms of being able to pop. So I think it is a solid deck. Win percentage wise online, like 59%, that's actually really good. At the same time, I think there's always a lot of hype usually when there's like a new set or new support that came out, and so I think with time it might start kind of going down again, but at the same time, again, I think it's a pretty solid deck for now. I think we gotta appreciate as it is. So next we have Marincess, which I did speak about a little earlier at the beginning of the video, and so it did top that Remote Duel Extravaganza, which in a way is not too surprising. It's actually done pretty decently well in the competitive scene in the last 6 months especially, some YCS tops, some regional tops, and so 58% win percentage online is also very good. I know there's a lot of hardcore Marincess fans out there, and they're probably very happy that this deck is still being able to do really well. It's a combo oriented deck. It has some pretty cool interactions in terms of, like, let's say their Marincess Wave Trap card that they can activate straight from their hand, not only improving your opponent's monsters but also being able to protect your own cards, and also it has a lot of room for flex spots like hand traps, so it's actually a really fun deck to play. And then next we have Telements, which is a deck that I honestly speak very highly of most of the time. In this current format, yes, the Bestials as well as, Shifter really craps on this deck, especially after all those hits that they got on the ban list. But I think, at some point, either the Bestials and or hopefully Shifter, at least one of those two will get hit at some point in the ban list, and I think this deck will eventually come back. It's going to be a really solid deck for quite some time, I think. 52%, it's like decent, and the type of board it can put up is really insane. It has some luck aspects to it, I get it, in terms of the mills, but it can still be pretty consistent. And so on top of that, not only they have a lot of things, right? They have Select for the negate, in terms of background charge them, they even have a counter trap, and of course all the monsters that they can put up. They can put up that Dark World Fusion for Omni negate. They have, like, access to like Barone and just all these other different like Rukalis is also very strong, so a lot of interruptions. Next we have Swordsoul, which is essentially, like one of the more reliable decks. So now that it's kind of fallen down to rogue status, I think it's still, a pretty solid deck to play. I believe it's actually pretty budget friendly as well, if you've seen any of my previous cost breakdown videos. So if you're kind of like new into the game and you want to start with a solid rogue deck, Swordsoul is a very good option at that. It's also pretty easy to play, not to discredit Swordsoul pilots. Of course, there's definitely a lot of intricacies like with any deck, but for the most part, a lot of its standard line of play is very pretty straightforward to pull off. So I think it's a very good deck to start off with as well, and still can do decently well. I'm sure you'll see at least like some regional tops here and there in this new format as well with this deck. So next we have Infernoble Knight, which I was a little surprised it scored a bit this low, because I'm sure you're seeing this deck a lot, whether online or let's say at your locals. It is kind of a deck that got a lot of new support in the most recent Dune set, so a lot of hype around it. But you know what, it really is a strong deck, especially when it does get to go first. It's very powerful, like in terms of being able to set up, a couple spell trap negates, like a pop, even a gear feed for the monster negate, so it can be very strong. The Aqua Dolphin line, especially when you start off that and rip a hand trap or any card really, as long as the attack kind of fits, then it's really, really strong. But at the same time, I think, it can lose the Dark Ruler quite hard, unless, there are some other workarounds. And let's say you could play like crossouts for the Dark Ruler, which I've seen my friends play, or I've even seen some people play anti-spell just for the sake of Dark Ruler. So I think that's kind of its kryptonite, but otherwise a very, very solid deck. Maybe even gets the tier 2 status at some point, but for now, another really fun choice. And so next we have Adventure Synchron. This is another deck I'm a little surprised it scored this low. I think this can definitely have potential to move up to tier 2 as long as, we give it some time. We've definitely seen some of the lines that it can make, in terms of like either hand looping, or it can even bring out that Calamity lock through Crimson Dragon, which essentially just prevents your opponent from playing at all. So it can be very, very strong. I think so far, clearly, it has not been doing too well, at least not online. We again have not had many events, if not any, so far to really see this deck shine, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of this coming out in the next few weeks, and I'm sure we'll see some tops here and there, and I think this is one with a lot of promise. And then we have Mathmech, another cyber strategy similar to the lines of Marincess, where, it has a lot of flex spots in terms of, being able to play a lot of hand traps, and the hand traps really matter a lot in this deck just because of Small World, and it can kind of bridge into just about anything with this deck. So online always has a really high win percentage, 58% this time around. If you wanted to really have a good rogue deck that you'd like to play for a long time, I think Mathmech is a really good investment. Right now, I think because of the Bestials and, something like Shifter really destroys this deck, it's a little tough. But again, I'm sure at some point down the line in the ban list, those two cards or concepts will get hit. And so Mathmech will have their time to shine again. I think it's going to be a good deck for time to come. It can set up a pretty good amount of interruptions going first, like Super Factorial for that essentially hand rip, like a negate, is really strong. And on top of that, you have all the hand traps, and going second, Access Code Talker, Update Jammer kind of thing. It can do it very easily, so really good choice. Then we have Altergeist, another deck that got some new support in Duelist Nexus. So we have a lot of these older rogue strategies coming back. I mean, I guess Infernoble was tier 1 before, so that's not really in the same conversation. But you know what? Kind of cool to see that, 52% win percentage, not bad. It is a back row kind of deck, so the downside of whenever you have a rogue deck that's, essentially like a worse version of something that's already meta. So in this instance, let's say Labyrinth is the best back row heavy kind of deck. And so because of that, you indirectly kind of suffer because people are deciding these specific cards for that meta version of the deck, which will also hit Altergeist, any kind of back row. Although, to be fair, any kind of back row side deck cards, usually people will play them anyways. To give Altergeist some credit though, it does also have some kind of monster interruption in terms of Hexia that can negate. And also on top of that, they can actually play Secret Village post side, which can really shut down a lot of back row moving cards, other than Evenly Matched, of course. But Altergeist, if I recall, they actually have an older card that can negate traps as well. I'm not sure if that's actually played though. But you know what? I think it's still kind of decent and cool to see Altergeist come back for at least now. And then another rogue option that's kind of got at least a little bit of support in Duelist Nexus is Dark World. Dark Corridor is an insane card. Unfortunately, it is a hard once per turn, or at least unfortunately for Dark World players. For the rest of us, I'm glad because that deck is, let's be real, it's not fun to play against unless you have Droll, which right now Droll is going to be played at least in the side deck now because of the initial hype for like Mana DM, for example, or any Synchro Pile. I think that hype has kind of died down significantly, but I think for now people are probably playing safe and still siding Droll at least. So it's not going to be a fun time for Dark World, but at the same time, if they don't have Droll, then this deck is going to have a field day and probably FTK you. Next we have Hero, and I always speak about this in terms of, its line to put up, something like Dark Left for the Banish effect, Hand Rip effect, and also Dark Angel. The whole spell negate is just FTK against a lot of strategies. In this format, I think Hero, again, is very good for those reasons alone, but even something like Plasma, whether you go first or even second, being able to just negate anything. So I can only imagine against Pearly, since Noir is only not affected by activate effects, and, you can just like skill drain with Plasma and take it, I guess. So I think Hero, as a rogue deck, is very, very good. It has a lot of versatile tools, and whether going first can set up a lot of interruptions, but going second can really OTK you as well. So this is always one of my top choices for rogue options. So moving on to the next category, I don't understand this at all, but we have Burning Abyss. Technically, it might actually be Phantom Knight, because YG Scope has this problem where it kind of groups them together. But whether it's Phantom Knight or Burning Abyss, I think it's still a little perplexing because I'm not sure why there's an uptick in play this past month. And 58% win percentage is very high, but of course this is probably based on a smaller sample size. Now, if this is actually Burning Abyss, which is usually like a back row heavy kind of strategy, I actually did a recent deck profile with my friend Gannon, who did a blind second Burning Abyss strategy with like a bunch of traps as well. So, we can Zeus Turbo. So, you know what? It's kind of like a classic deck. A lot of people love this deck. Is it going to be good this format? I'm not entirely sure. Probably not. But hey, I mean, for some reason, there's a lot of people playing online right now. So maybe you can try it out. And then next we have Sky Striker, which for the most part has always been popular online, regardless of how good it actually is in any format. Nowadays, I think it's finally actually seen some decline in terms of popularity. It's definitely has not had much success, even with, you know, Engage coming to 2 and Multi-Role coming back to 3 on that last list. Other than that one remote duel, YCS top by my friend Dylan Fricker. This hasn't done too much, unfortunately. There's some Sky Striker engine being played. For example, at the NAWCQ, the top 32 going second spriteless actually played a Sky Striker engine, which you can check on my channel as well. So I think that part is really cool. I think it can definitely exist as a package at least, but as a deck, it's certainly struggling a little bit right now. And then we have Trap Tricks, which of course again is another deck that's definitely fallen a lot in terms of popularity, but as a rogue option, it's as rogue as it gets. Really budget friendly and really good for new players as well. Probably the best one for new players to start out with. And so the problem this deck always had, you know, it has like combo aspects, back row elements, which is really nice, but the problem has always been, you know, going second, it's been very hard to break boards with this deck, and now it's even worse because you have some newer options that entered the format, such as Infernoble and Adventure Synchro that I mentioned, where going first, these decks are just so incredibly powerful and to break boards that I think it kind of makes it harder for Trap Tricks, so I can kind of see the reason for its decline. And then next we have Fluwandereeze, which I'm a little surprised this has fallen quite a lot in terms of representation. It usually actually does see a pretty good amount of play online. And so, you know, 58% win percentage. This deck always has like a really high win percentage all the time. I think it's still quite solid, even without Windberry. You know, like cards like Dimension Shifter and Featherstorm is just an ultimate sack. And this deck can, of course, utilize those very well, better than any other deck. And so I think, you know, as long as those cards are still legal, this deck will still have an opportunity in the meta, especially because it is only focused on normal summoning, and a lot of times, you know, we have, let's say, Gimmick Lock or Ibli Lock, you know, focusing on special summons, and Fluwandereeze just completely doesn't care about that, or rather Bystials in general as well. So really solid rogue option, at least in the current format, until Shifter is hopefully hit. And then we also have Dinos, you know, always good old reliable in terms of the rogue category. Unfortunately, has not done too well in the competitive scene. I believe last format, though, it did get like maybe one regional top or two, at least that's publicly known. And, you know, it did get some recent support. Maybe Mist comes back to 2 at some point. I think I lost a little bit of hope when it didn't come off the list after it actually got some recent set announced. So, you know what? There's still always hope for now. Win percentage wise, 43%. Really terrible, actually. So, not doing very well, but it can, you know, Dinos have some good versatility. I'm not sure if they really play like kind of like the combo heavy with the scrap version anymore. Maybe they do. That's more of a going first option. It's always been pretty good going second as well. Just UTC just stomping over everything. So for now, not the amazing spot for Dinos, but hopefully they get Mist back at 2 at some point for their sake. So next we have Dogmatica, which I think is very slept on. I mean, last format, I think it at least got one regional top, at least that's publicly known. So, you know, of course, we haven't had any events so far, but I think it's not seeing that much play online or at locals, really. But combined with, like, the branded stuff, which in itself is very strong, you know, Dogmatica can be quite a strong rogue strategy, anti-meta strategy at that. It can, like, rip extra deck pretty efficiently, and I guess better than Cashier can now, just because, you know, Mind Hacker's banned. So I think this is definitely something on the lookout. You do also have something like Duality that came out recently, which of course goes very well with in combination of something like Fleur-de-Lis or something like Maximus, and Maximus can also be very strong, although of course can also be very detrimental if you're playing against, like, let's say Branded, or even something like Cashier, Flender, Labyrinth. They all have something in their extra deck that can kind of give them benefits, so something to consider. But Dogmatica I think is actually quite solid. And then we also have Punk, which typically you can either play it as pure, or, you know, a lot of times you also see it played with Gold Pride, which is actually top the NAWCQ, for example. So there's definitely a lot of potential with this strategy. Certainly has fallen down a lot in terms of popularity compared to, let's say, like 3-4 months ago. And especially now in terms of synchro strategies, you just have more popular options in terms of, you know, Manadium or, let's say, Adventure Synchron pile. Nonetheless, it's still there. Unfortunately, in time rules, Punk is definitely one of the worst decks you can play, maybe after Dynamorphia, just because you lose so much life points. But other than that, I think you can have a very good time. Psychic and Punisher is very hard to out for a lot of decks, so something to that you can just sit on. And then we also have Exo Sister making it here. Of course, this is very infamously known for, in terms of Steven Santoli, who essentially got to Worlds with this deck, and also he's topped regionals as well with it, so it does very well with the deck. And so there's definitely potential. It's another deck that can utilize Shifter very well, and if you can utilize Shifter, then you're probably going to have a pretty good time this format, because aside from Kashtira and Flunder, most strategies kind of just fold to Shifter, and Exo Sister can also play some strong floodgates like Gozen Match, which can also be very strong against something like Kashtira. And last, in the final category, we have Super Heavy Samurai. So this is definitely fallen quite hard, right? It's nowadays, I think you kind of see it with some other kind of different strategy. Like we've seen it with like Spiral, we've seen it with Zephyra. So it's more of a package, I think. 55% win percentage again is pretty good, but you never really know like what this is a tribute to, in terms of which kind of variant. So it's definitely fallen off from after that Scarecrow ban very, very early with this deck being better for like 3 weeks. I guess Konami's not really a fan of one card combos where you could also play a crap ton of hand traps. And lastly, we have Salamangreat. I'm glad it actually still made it onto the tier list, just because we do have some Soul Burning Volcano coming out very, very shortly, which you can, of course, check out some pre-orders at Card Brawlers or Tier 0 Games and use code Hakuna5 for 5% off. Salamangreat, I heard the new support doesn't actually really help too much, though. But you know what? It's a pretty solid rogue option, I guess. I think it's still going to struggle quite a bit. It can play a lot of hand traps, though, which is always kind of nice. It does have a counter trap, it has some pops, it has a good amount of recursion as well, but you know what, it's definitely nowhere close to what it was previously in terms of its meta success. So for now, I think there's definitely better rogue options there, unfortunately. And then some other decks I want to highlight at the end is Rescue Ace and Chimera. So Rescue Ace I did mention at the beginning of the video. Some of you may have skipped that, but basically, I'm going to categorize it as tier 2 for now. But I think there's definitely conversations to be had for it to be in the rogue section moving forward. Just because I heard it is a very, very fragile deck. I heard Ash on Emergency is pretty much as detrimental as Ash on Brand Infusion. And you also have Chimera that I really want to look at separately moving forward. Right now, it is definitely meshed in with the whole branded strategy. But I think this is definitely a really, really good option to kind of have an eye out for. It definitely has a lot of unique interactions. Branded in itself is already very strong, but Chimera Fusion is also quite strong, and being able to utilize Guardian Chimera really well, as well as their other interruptions in terms of kind of like a hand rip as well, is I think really cool and something to watch out for. Well, that's it for the rogue tier list for this month. Hopefully you found that helpful, and hopefully it was useful in helping you decide which rogue decks to pursue for this new format post Dune. So as always, big thanks to all of you for watching. A huge thanks to my patrons as always for supporting the channel, and well, take care guys.